If now's the right time, I'd like to go through kind of my view. I wasn't really allowed to go through that last time. To share kind of my thoughts, because my thoughts are at a higher level. I don't, this nitpicking onesie, twosie. I'm looking at the overarching budget with some policies and principles, so I'd like to go through that now if I could, and that might spark some larger discussion items.
Do we, yeah, I've been through your presentation a few times. We've had 3 weeks to review it. I assume what you handed out tonight is the same version as what we looked at the last couple of versions?
It's slightly different.
So
that went out on Wednesday.
So I looked at that one, the latest one you sent out, and I saw where the numbers changed. So I'd appreciate if we could just get kind of an executive summary of the presentation instead of taking. It's a lengthy presentation. I'm not quite sure we've got enough time.
I only go through the first handful of slides. I never go through the appendix, and it completes a picture for me. So I'll go through it as fast as I can.
I mean, we've done a good job here of highlighting the recommendations, the cuts.
They're not. If you let me proceed, I think you'll notice it's a little different than what you think I'm going to say.
You saw my email last Friday, I think it was, where, we needed to have structure, and I'm not quite I've been through the presentation. I know what you're asking for. I assume my fellow council colleagues have done the same.
Actually, they haven't. I heard
Well, I think then they haven't done their homework preparing for the meeting. And I think, frankly, I'd rather not take the 15 minutes that it would take to go through the presentation and move on with the structure the way the mayor is going through it.
So the rules that were stipulated last time was I need to give it 2 weeks in advance, so then I could go through it. So now you're telling me that doesn't apply now.
I'm looking at the hour and a half we have. If everybody took the time you're going to take to go through the presentation, we'd be out of time instead of having the opportunity to discuss the individual projects.
I guess what I share a slightly different concern, or maybe I share the same concern, I'm just not hearing it in what you're saying, Steve. So I've been giving a lot of thought in the intervening 3 weeks to what's been bothering me in the last few meetings. And I'm actually not directing this at any one individual. I'm directing this as a general statement. And that is that, and by the way, in those same intervening weeks, I prepared C-level executives for a board meeting. I presented to C-level executives on a number of occasions, and I'm constantly reminded of the words that I hear many of our council members use, and that is we should operate government more like a business. And so as I started to think about that, one of the things that I noted that's very different in the way that we've been operating as this group and how I see things operate in business is I see that every time I make a presentation or I'm being asked to make a presentation to high-level executives or our board of directors, I'm asked to give them a significant amount of detail in advance of whatever the topic is that I'm supposed to be preparing on, and that when I actually get in front of them, I give them a 5 to 10 minute summary of what that is, and I then allow them, because they've read it in advance, and if they haven't, well, then that was their choice, but I mean, they're the decision-making body, not me in that instance. And I then simply answer whatever questions need to be answered. I think from a time allocation standpoint, we are struggling to manage our meeting times. And the thing that I would ask the council to consider is certainly not cutting off anybody's voice, but simply to do exactly what Stephanie did in this instance, which was to send this out in advance, and I appreciate that because it did give me a chance to prep for it like I would anything else, and that we consider giving a synopsis of whatever the information is that we've shared with each other to each other, and then simply allow the council and assume that they've studied the material, and if they've got questions, they'll ask it. I think if we keep it at an executive level, then I think we can manage our time and still get the value that each of us has to deliver. I don't know what y'all's thoughts are on that.
I agree. I mean, we use that expression a lot in the private sector. Fill in the blank. Well, in the private sector, you'd have an executive summary of something like this before you delivered the whole presentation. And what this presentation is lacking is that summary.
Well, I wasn't critiquing the presentation. I was simply saying I don't care whether it comes after the fact or comes with it. I just know that that's what I'm asked to deliver.
So you're changing the rules again and telling me you don't want to hear from me because I didn't send out an executive.
We're not changing.
I'd be done by now.
We're not changing the rules.
I'd be done.
Well, if it's that quick, if it's 5 minutes, go ahead.
It's 5, maybe 10 minutes. I would be done.
Great.
And so I didn't get any time last time and was hurried along to just throw. So I'd like to, if you'd let me continue. Robert's rule says when someone has the floor, how the floor is utilized is not dictated. So I'd like to utilize my time to share with you my thoughts. If you don't like the way I present the thoughts, then I guess tune me out.
you got the whole council here to talk to, not just me,
And if
Stephanie.
4 of you don't want me to speak, then raise your hands and say so.
I'm not asking you not to speak. I'm going to ask you, and I think you've already heard it because you've just acknowledged it. I'm asking you to limit the amount of time to that executive summary that will help us understand the points that you were trying to get across in the presentation.
All right, so are we going to share the presentation with the public so that they can see it, or no?
So this is one of these things where, and I appreciate you doing it ahead of time, but we're getting blasted for not listening to you, and that's not what we're doing. We made an agreement at our retreat that we weren't going to throw things on each other last minute, and frankly, that's what you did in the past. So I'm happy that you're giving it to ahead of time. I have prepared for this. I've looked over this. When someone comes up to do a presentation, we can say, hey, we want the presentation or we don't. And that's simply, I feel like I have the information here. If you want to go through the points, I'm fine with that. I'm not trying to hold you back, but I don't think it's fair for you to do that when we made some ground rules. So you're saying we're changing the rules. No, we're not changing the rules. We came up with the rules. You just didn't want to play by those rules. And frankly, that's not fair to the rest of us because it makes us look bad, Stephanie.
The rules
We
were
agreed
not-
to that.
No, we didn't.
Yes,
And
we did.
If we're going to hold
The rest of the council,
Can I
did we agree to
finish?
that or not?
Can I get started? Because we got,
This is important because this happens all the time, and we need to get this out of the, once. No one's trying to stop you from talking, but we agreed to certain things, and then ask the rest of the council. They can tell you whether we agreed to it. We said we weren't going to slam things on the rest of us because it wasn't fair to us, and it wasn't fair to the public to put something on last minute.
My recollection of the discussion at the retreat, I think you're referring to the retreat,
Correct.
was that we said that there'd be, the way I always summarized it, I don't know if those were the words that were used at the retreat, was no surprises. And I think that by asking for distribution of items in advance, we've accomplished the no surprises part. So from that standpoint, I feel like this particular item was presented to the council as I remember it on Wednesday. That would fall in my category as no surprises. That doesn't necessarily address what I raised. And I think Stephanie's about to address what I raised, which is give us an executive summary of the item. But the thing that I guess I'm also bothered by is maybe I view this meeting differently than you all do. I view this meeting as a business meeting of the body. It is not, while we do it in the public atmosphere, and while we do that for transparency, I don't believe it is a presentation to the public per se. That doesn't mean that the public can't get the information, et cetera. And I guess the distinction I'm just trying to draw is that I believe we should curb or shape our comments such that they are whatever this body needs and not this broader spectrum of what the public may need. Hopefully, we provide information such that they can come along the spectrum as well. But at the end of the day, we are the elected representatives, and we have to decipher whatever information we're given, and we have to make the best decisions we can that we think represent the interest of the citizens of Johns Creek. Just a perspective. Sorry, Stephanie, it's yours.
okay. So initially, like we talked about last time, your budget from an accounting perspective, so you're now using terms that from a professional perspective have ramifications for me on my professional experience, my integrity, which goes to my career certification. So when you're talking about a budget being transparent and mature, there are certain things that go with that, which is why I would agree that most of the things we should be talking about are higher level, but there are some policies I think that we need to put in place to come to some agreement. So, if we're saying transparency, budget maturity, promises made, promises kept. And so I provided you all with a resolution so that we could come up with, in essence, a memorandum of understanding between all of us. Because to me, when we're sitting going through projects and we're given budgets and all of that, I think we all may interpret that information differently. But to me, when I'm given information to make a solid decision because I work for the residents, that information holds solid. And so the resolution that I provided to you, which I heard from nobody about that at all, and I'd like to see this move forward so that we don't have these conversations and continual rehashing of projects where the dollars change. I mean, it's really working through some firm definitions of what a budget process is and what it means, and the intent of council to establish fiscal oversight. And so I would like to spend some time on this. If y'all aren't interested in doing it today, I'd like to do it in our next meeting because it's relevant to the budget we're putting in place now, recognizing the importance of the document, which was my overarching concern about this process when we sit here and throw these items out about personal preference on a list. I'm not interested in micromanaging the budget. At the end of the day, if we're meeting the needs and the priorities that we've defined, then we're good. I don't want to sit here and say I do or don't want pickleball courts. I'm going to look at the larger topics. Just for clarity, I think there's two issues. You definitely have reactive maintenance from an operations perspective, and whether it's the city's money or it's the city helping these entities get grants or whatever, there is a facilitation job we have to assist them because we've done nothing to help mitigate the problem. And if St. Ives is in the same boat, we should be doing the same thing for them. This is not one. It's just we have an immediate need for a subdivision that's dumped millions of dollars in that we can definitely show. I mean, we've seen the pictures. We've seen the evidence. And we've done nothing because Fulton County did manage a lot of this stuff before we took over the city. So, and it's creating goodwill.
So first of all, Fulton did not. They may have done some things differently than us, but I would argue that the unbridled growth that our city went through, the removal of the fees that they took from the north and paid in the south, put us in a position where at the same time we were growing, the full mitigation of that growth was far from dealt with by Fulton County. It's the essence of why we are a city. Secondly,
yes,
the general statement that we've done nothing, and I believe that's almost a direct quote from what you just said, Councilmember Endres.
It
is a bit strong compared to the reality. We have stormwater people on staff. We look at this on a regular basis. We take mitigating steps when we build things. Could we do more? I'm sure we could. But the statement in a wholesale fashion that says we've done nothing is
so
the
let me
kind
caveat
of stuff. I don't need the caveat. I'm actually using this to point out an example. I struggle when you make some of these presentations because I actually listen to the words that are used, and I find that they are extreme in nature, and it makes me tune out. And I don't want to do that. I really do want to listen because I know there are morsels of value in there, but I'm struggling. So I'm just giving you a word of advice that says that I would take some of the extreme language out and just present the facts.
Let's make one other comment.
Sure.
Particularly in fairness to the staff and fairness to your fellow council members, when you make statements that we're going rogue on the budget, I think it's just completely unfair to the amount of work that the department heads did, the city manager did, Kimberly Greer did, in preparing the budget. No one's going rogue, Stephanie.
I
wrote down rogue when you said
If I said rogue, then it wasn't meant in that situation. The process for us is the way that we go through the process of nitpicking little items. I don't want to be in those details. We shouldn't be micromanaging all
But
of
you
this
were
stuff.
in the details. You said first came off the bat, we need to do the turf fields. I want to put this in here.
We have
So
to
you
from
are
a major
nitpicking.
perspective, but that nitpicking is in response to the priorities. We never had the real priority discussion. Normal budgets, we've had 3 weeks, maybe 5 weeks to review the entire budget, but there was no real planning session that involved the board of directors. We never had that prioritization discussion that we discussed, that we didn't really have at our retreat, that we talked about following back up. So because of that, we've got all kinds of new initiatives in here, but at the end of the day, we've already defined, and staff already has a full-time job based on what Mrs. Greer came and told us in May and June. So where is this time going to come from? And if we're not going to allow staff to do what falls in the park bond, T-Splosh, maintaining what we own, because you even commented on the parks and the batting cages and what bad shape they're in. We know the grounds are always in bad shape. How do we change that so we're being the exception? We're delivering the product we said we're going to deliver, just like we're talking about right-of-way. How do we do that if not here? This is where that happens. That's why this document's so important.
Part of that would be to stay focused on our strategic goals, because one of the things I noticed that this council has a tendency to do is knee-jerk quite a bit.